They thought I was done. My son said I was forgetful. My daughter said I was tired. They spoke for me, told the banks I couldn't manage my own accounts, told the doctors I couldn't remember my medications, told the lawyers I didn't understand my rights. And I let them, at least at first. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight back. But then, one day, I couldn't even sign my own check. The one thing that had always been my ability to sign my name, to make my own choices, was taken from me. They did it so quietly, so smoothly, that I almost didn't notice at first. They didn't ask me. They didn't look at me like I was the person who had built everything they had. They looked at me like I was a child, like I was someone who couldn't make a decision without their help. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't tired. No, I was documenting. Every date, every lie, every time they called me sweetheart instead of mom. I kept track of everything, the way they treated me, the way they took control of my life like it was theirs to take. I wrote it all down in a notebook, the one I kept tucked away where they couldn't see. They thought I was weak, that I had no fight left in me. They thought they could take everything, take my voice, my independence, and I would just sit back and let them. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't done. I was building something, slowly, quietly. I wasn't lost. I was waiting for the right moment to take it all back. And when that moment came, they'd realize that I had never been the one to give it up in the first place. I gave everything for them, every ounce of myself, every last bit of energy. It wasn't just the big things, the school fees, the birthday parties, the family vacations. It was in the small things, the quiet moments when no one noticed. Early motherhood was like that. 1,000 little sacrifices made day after day, with no fanfare, no recognition. It wasn't about the applause. It was about the work. The silent work that no one saw, that no one thanked me for, but that kept our lives together. I cooked. I paid. I stayed up late checking their homework, making sure they understood the lessons that weren't easy, and getting up early to scrub the floors before anyone else woke up. I was the one who made sure there was always food on the table, even if I had to skip a meal to make it stretch. I was the one who put the laundry in, folded the towels, and straightened the house, making it look effortless even when my body was aching from the weight of it all. They never saw the exhaustion, the moments when I felt like I was being pulled in 100 different directions. They didn't need to. I kept it all hidden because that's what mothers do. We keep it together for them. I wanted them to have what I never had. I wanted them to have opportunities, to have a life where they didn't have to struggle the way I did. So I worked harder. I gave more. I pushed myself to the edge, sometimes without even realizing how much of myself I was losing in the process. But I never complained. I never asked for help. I just kept going because they needed me to. There were moments, quiet ones, when I would look around at the life I had built for them and wonder if they even noticed the weight I was carrying. Did they see the long hours I put in? Did they understand how many nights I lay awake, worrying about how to make ends meet, how to give them what they needed? I didn't ask for anything in return. All I wanted was for them to be happy, to be successful. But deep down, I hoped, just once, they'd see what I was doing for them and appreciate it. I don't think they ever really saw it, not in the way I wanted them to. They didn't see the way I pushed my own dreams aside to make sure theirs could grow. They didn't see how I gave up pieces of myself to make sure they had everything they needed, to make sure they were safe, happy, and taken care of. They didn't see the sacrifices I made, and I guess, at the time, I never really expected them to. It wasn't until years later, when I started feeling worn thin, when I started feeling invisible, that I realized I had been holding it all together for everyone else, but not for myself. I had spent my life making sure they didn't feel the weight of the world, and in doing so, I had lost track of how heavy that weight had become. They hadn't seen it because I hadn't let them. I hadn't let them see the toll it had taken, the way I had bent and bent until there was nothing left to bend. But that was the way it was. I didn't need them to see it. I didn't need them to understand how hard I worked, how much I gave. I did it because I loved them. I did it because that was what mothers do. They give everything, and they don't ask for anything in return. But now, Looking back, I see how much I gave, how much I held back, how much I sacrificed. And I can't help but wonder, did they ever know? Did they ever truly see how much I gave up for them to have everything I never had? I did it for them. But now I realize I have to do something for myself. I can't keep holding it all together if it means losing myself in the process. And maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe, in giving them everything, I forgot to keep something for myself. But that's going to change. This time, I'm going to find a way to give to myself too. I've given them everything I had. Now, it's time to take something back. I didn't want to believe it at first. I kept telling myself I was just imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that they were just trying to help. It all started so innocently. A comment here and there, a casual suggestion. "You don't need to worry about that, Mom," they'd say, as if it were nothing, as if I was too old or too tired to handle my own affairs. But those words stuck with me. They felt off, like a crack in the foundation I had built my life on. But I ignored it. I told myself they were only trying to protect me, trying to make things easier. I wanted to believe that. The first real sign came when I noticed the missing mail. My pension checks, the bills, notices from the bank, all of it, started to disappear. At first, I thought it was just a mix-up, a delay. The post office had made mistakes before. I wasn't worried. But then I realized how often it was happening. The letters I had been expecting never showed up. And when I asked, they gave me excuses. Oh, the bank probably sent it to the wrong address. Or, the post office must have lost it. I tried not to think too much of it. Maybe I was just imagining it. I was getting older, after all. I didn't need to worry about the little things, right? They were helping. They said they were helping. But then there were the forms. Those accidental forms that kept showing up. They'd bring them to me, ask me to sign something here or there. "It's just a simple form, Mom. Don't worry about it. We'll handle it for you." And because I trusted them, because I believed they were just looking out for me, I signed without asking too many questions. They were always so convincing. "You don't need to worry about the details. We've got this." I thought they were protecting me. I didn't see they were positioning me. I didn't see the subtle way they were taking control of everything, moving me out of the picture without me even realizing it. At first, it was small things, loans in my name, credit card applications I never filled out, medical bills that seemed to appear from nowhere. But when I looked closer, I could see the pattern. They were using me, my name, my identity, to get what they wanted. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe that my children, the ones I had given everything for, were doing this out of love, out of concern for my well-being. They were only trying to help, weren't they? Maybe they thought I couldn't handle things anymore. Maybe they thought I had forgotten how to take care of myself. Maybe they didn't see me the way I saw myself, strong, capable, able to stand on my own. But the truth was becoming clear, even if I didn't want to see it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little respect they had for my independence, my ability to make decisions for myself. They weren't helping me. They were taking control. They were stripping me of the very thing that had made me who I was, the right to choose, the right to manage my own life. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that they were just doing what was best for me. The truth was harder to face than I had imagined. The people I trusted most, the ones I had sacrificed so much for, had been slowly taking everything from me, voice, my power, my rights under the guise of care, of concern. The more I thought about it, the more the anger started to build inside me. But it wasn't an angry kind of anger. It was a quiet kind of rage, the kind that builds up slowly, without noise, without warning. It was the kind of anger that comes from knowing you've been used, manipulated, pushed aside by the very people you've given everything to. I had given them everything, and in return, they had taken it all. I had to face it. I had to see it for what it was. And as I sat there, staring at the pile of papers in front of me, the forms they had asked me to sign, the checks I hadn't received, I knew something had to change. I couldn't let them keep taking from me. Not anymore. I had been blind to it, but now I wasn't going to let them hide behind their excuses anymore. I had to do something. I had to take back control of my life. Because, for the first time in years, I finally understood what had been happening. They weren't protecting me. They were positioning me. And I wasn't going to let them win. The betrayal came in layers, each one more suffocating than the last. It started small, like a crack in the foundation that I could ignore, that I could tell myself was nothing. But soon, it became something I couldn't hide from, something I couldn't ignore anymore. And when I finally saw it for what it was, I couldn't even raise my voice. I was too stunned, too humiliated. It was the legal power of attorney that did it the moment I learned that without my consent, they had signed papers, gotten the legal right to handle my affairs. They hadn't asked me. They didn't explain it to me. They just did it. Because they thought they could. They thought I wouldn't understand. I hadn't even been in the room when the papers were signed. And yet, there they were. Legally binding documents that handed them control over everything I had worked for. The moment I realized it, the weight of it dropped on me, suffocating me. How long had they been planning this? How many times had they acted in my name without me even knowing? But it didn't stop there. Not by a long shot. The next blow came when I found out my bank accounts had been frozen. My money, my savings was no longer mine. They had taken control of it all, without so much as a whisper of warning. There were no discussions, no meetings. Just a letter from the bank saying that my accounts had been frozen for safekeeping, and that the new signatories on my accounts were, in fact, them. It was like the life I had worked for had been erased, like it never existed at all. I remember the first day they came into my house after the accounts were frozen. They stood there in front of me, standing in the place where I had spent years building a life, handed each other keys, as if I were already gone, as if I was nothing more than an afterthought. One key for the house, another for the bank box, another for the car. They didn't even look at me. They didn't even hesitate. They simply exchanged them, as if there was no reason for me to even be there. I stood in the doorway watching them, feeling the sting of humiliation cut through me. They were taking everything without a word, without a shred of remorse. It was like they had already decided I wasn't worth fighting for. I was already gone to them. In their minds, all that was left was to claim their prize. The worst part? I couldn't say a word. I couldn't even move. It was like I was paralyzed, trapped in my own home, unable to do anything but watch them take what was mine. They didn't ask me. They didn't give me a chance to speak. They just took. The whole time, they smiled. They smiled like they were doing me a favor, like this was all part of some plan I was too weak to understand. They took everything while smiling. I thought I had given them everything. I thought I had been there for them, giving up my own needs for their happiness, for their success. But in the end, they had taken everything from me money, my independence, my dignity, and done it without even blinking. They had thought I wouldn't notice, thought I wouldn't fight back. They were so sure that I was too old, too tired, to be worth the effort of standing up to. But they had underestimated me. I stood there, frozen for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. I had nothing left. Everything I had worked for, every small bit of security I had managed to hold on to, was gone. And it wasn't just the things. It was the years I had spent giving to them, loving them, and all they had given me in return was silence, control, and betrayal. The hardest part was the realization that they hadn't even thought twice about it. They hadn't been remorseful. They hadn't hesitated. To them, this wasn't even a betrayal. It was a transaction, and I was nothing but a part of it. I thought about all the years I had spent silently holding everything together for them, and now here they were, standing in my house, taking everything without a second glance. The silence between us was deafening, and I knew something had changed. I wasn't the person I had been before. I wasn't the mother they thought they could control anymore. I had been blind to it for so long, but now I saw it clearly. They had always seen me as someone they could take from, someone they could manipulate, but they didn't realize what that would cost them. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not anymore. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just let it happen. But they were wrong. They had taken everything, but what they didn't know was that they had awakened something in me, something they would soon regret. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't losing my mind, running through the house in a frenzy, demanding answers. I wasn't throwing things or begging for them to see me. I was simply writing. I had learned long ago that the best way to handle situations like this, when you're being ignored, when you're being dismissed, when your voice doesn't matter, is to stay calm, stay controlled, and document everything. It started with a phone call to a senior advocacy group. I'd heard about them through a friend, a woman who had been through a similar struggle. They offered free legal aid for situations like mine when the people you trusted most took control of your life without asking, without permission, when you couldn't trust your own children to act in your best interest. They put me in touch with a lawyer who specialized in elder rights, someone who understood exactly what I was going through, someone who knew how to fight back. I didn't expect things to move quickly. I knew this would be a slow process, that I would be facing a long, quiet fight. But the moment I spoke to the lawyer, I felt a small spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. He wasn't dismissive like the others. He didn't brush me off or assume I didn't understand what was happening. He listened, and that made all the difference. But that wasn't the only help I had. Every time they dismissed me, every time they made me feel small or confused or unimportant, I wrote it down. The conversations, the looks, the moments when they acted like I didn't know what was going on, when they treated me like I was too frail to understand. I kept a notebook. I filled it with dates, times, and the words they used every time they called me sweetheart instead of mom. Every time they assumed I was too tired to speak up for myself. Every time they ignored me when I tried to ask questions. I wrote it all down. Every single moment. The first time I noticed they were trying to take control of my accounts, I wrote it down. When I found out they had signed legal documents without asking for my consent, I wrote it down. Every time they suggested don't worry about it or let them handle it, I wrote it down. I was careful, precise. This was my evidence. This was the foundation of what I was going to do. They called me quiet, but they didn't know. I wasn't quiet because I didn't have anything to say. I was quiet because I was collecting quotes. I was gathering evidence, building a case that they would never see coming. I had been silent for so long, but that silence had a purpose. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't submission. It was strategy. The lawyer began to help me navigate the maze of legalities, and as I gathered more evidence, I began to see the full picture of what had been happening. They had been slowly taking over, trying to control everything without me even realizing it. And every time they made another move, another subtle attempt to keep me from knowing what was going on, I had written it down. Every time they treated me like a child, or assumed I was too old to understand the paperwork, I had written it down. Every single time they dismissed me, I documented it. I didn't yell. I didn't lash out. I just wrote. I took my time. I let them think I didn't see them, that I was too tired or too old or too confused to understand their game. But I was watching. I was listening. I was writing it all down. I wasn't just taking notes. I was taking back my power. Slowly, carefully, I was building the foundation of a case that would make them regret thinking I was too weak to fight back. I wasn't going to let them take my life away without consequence. They thought they could control me, but they didn't know how strong I really was. They didn't know how much power I had in my quiet, controlled actions. Every time they dismissed me, I wrote it down. Every time they told me to be quiet, I collected the evidence. And when the time came, when I had gathered enough, I knew what I would do. They would see what I had been doing all along. They would see the strength I had, the quiet, unshakable strength that had been waiting for the right moment. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't losing control. I was just writing. And when I was done, they would see what it meant to underestimate me. The time had come to make my move. I had spent so many years silently carrying the weight of their decisions, their control over me, but no more. I had the documents, the evidence, everything I needed to make things right. I wasn't going to wait any longer for them to change their minds. I was going to take it all back quietly, but decisively. I filed for legal reversal, challenging the power of attorney they had so easily taken over my life. The paperwork was meticulous. I made sure every date, every form, every signed document was in place. I had collected their lies, their manipulations, and now it was time to show them for what they truly were. I wasn't confused anymore. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I reached out to a lawyer woman who had a reputation for being tough, sharp, and deeply compassionate. When I spoke with her for the first time, she didn't treat me like I was frail or incapable. She listened. She didn't interrupt me or brush off my concerns like others had. She took the time to understand exactly what had happened, and in that moment, I knew I was in good hands. She was kind, but she was also fierce. I could see it in her eyes. This was someone who fought for people like me. Someone who had seen the same thing time and time again, the silent ways that people are pushed aside, used, and discarded. She wasn't going to let this happen to me any longer. I could feel her resolve, and in that moment, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about both of us, standing together, pushing back against the system that had allowed my family to take what wasn't theirs to take. We filed the motion, and I watched as she took control. She was strategic, and I followed her lead, trusting that she knew exactly how to handle the intricacies of the case. There were letters, phone calls, meetings with other attorneys, but each time she stood firm. She didn't let anyone brush us off. She didn't let anyone tell us we didn't have a case. I could feel the tension building, the anticipation of what was to come. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't scared. I knew I had done everything I could to prepare. I had collected all the evidence I needed. I had written everything down. I had made my case. Now, all that was left was to show up and let the law do its work. The day of the hearing arrived, and as I walked into the courtroom, I felt the weight of it all. But it wasn't a weight of fear, it was a weight of knowing I had done what needed to be done. This was my chance to stand up for myself, to let the world hear my voice, even if they had ignored me for so long. They didn't hear my voice, but they had to hear hers in court. My lawyer stood tall, speaking with the kind of confidence I hadn't known I had in me. Her words were sharp and calculated. She laid out the case with precision, pointing to each piece of evidence that proved how my family had taken advantage of me, how they had manipulated me, how they had assumed they could control my life without consequence. Her voice was steady, powerful, and each word she spoke landed like a blow to the lies they had built. The judge listened, and I could see him nodding as the facts were laid out, as the documents and testimonies proved my case. My son and daughter sat across the room, their faces pale as the reality of what they had done began to sink in. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to fight back. I didn't need to say a word. I had already said everything in the evidence. My lawyer spoke for me, and her voice carried the strength I had built over the years. She spoke with authority, and I felt the power shift in that room. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the law, about what was right, and about what they had taken from me. When the hearing ended, I knew the decision was coming. I didn't need to wait for the judge's ruling. The outcome was clear. They had underestimated me. They had thought I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't tired. I had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to take everything back that they had stolen. And when the ruling came, when the judge announced that the power of attorney was being reversed, that the accounts would be restored to my name, that the control they had tried to take would be returned to me, I felt a quiet, steady satisfaction settle within me. It wasn't a victory of anger. It was a victory of quiet strength, of patience, of knowing that I had done the work, that I had played the game on my terms. I took it all back, quietly. But it was mine again. And this time, no one would take it from me again. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. I had already made my move. And now, all that was left was to watch them face the consequences of what they had done. For years, they had spoken over me, dismissed me, assumed I was weak, too tired, too old to stand up for myself. But in the end, it wasn't me who needed to speak. It was the law. It was the papers that had been filed, the legal actions that had been taken. It was the truth. The subpoena arrived at their door, just like I had planned. It wasn't a loud, dramatic thing. It was simple, quiet, just a piece of paper. But when they got it, I knew exactly what their faces would look like. I could picture it, the shock, the confusion, the disbelief. They had thought they were safe, that they could keep me in the background, keep me silent while they took control of my life. They had underestimated me. The morning the papers were served, I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I had already seen everything I needed to see in the way they carried themselves when they thought no one was paying attention. I knew they wouldn't expect this. And I knew they would try to ignore it, try to dismiss it, like they had done everything else. But this was different. This was real. And I wasn't going to let them hide behind their excuses anymore. I could feel the tension building from the moment the papers were delivered. They tried to cover it up, try to pretend that it wasn't happening. But I could see through it. I could feel the silence on their end for once. For the first time in a long time, they weren't speaking over me. They weren't trying to explain themselves or excuse their actions. They were silent, and that was more powerful than any words they could have said. They didn't know what to do. They had talked over me for years, brushing aside my concerns, telling me I didn't understand, that I didn't have the energy for this fight. They had ignored me, taken from me, and never once did they stop to ask if I was okay, if I was capable, if I was still here. But the silence between us now felt different. It was theirs this time, not mine. They had no words to offer. There was nothing they could say to explain themselves, to make it go away. And when the day came for them to speak in court, when they had to face me in front of the judge, it wasn't me who interrupted them. It was the judge. As they began to explain their actions, to try to justify everything they had done, the judge cut them off mid-sentence. He didn't need to hear their excuses. The evidence was already there. It was all laid out in front of use very thing they had done, every time they tried to take what wasn't theirs, every lie they had told, every decision they had made for me without my permission. And when the judge spoke, there was no room for argument. There was no place left for their manipulation. I had been silent for so long, but now the silence was theirs to bear. They couldn't talk over me anymore. They couldn't dismiss me. The tables had turned. And for the first time, they were the ones who had to listen. They were the ones who had to answer for their actions. And in that moment, as I watched them scramble, trying to find a way to explain themselves, I knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. They had thought I was weak, that I was too old or too confused to understand what was happening. They had thought they could take everything without consequences, that I would just sit back and let them. But I had learned how to use their silence against them, how to let their own words trap them. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue. I had already built my case, and now all that was left was for them to face the truth. As the judge made his ruling, I didn't feel any rush of victory. I didn't feel the need to gloat. The satisfaction wasn't in their defeat. It was in knowing that I had never needed to yell, never needed to fight loud enough for them to hear me. I had let the law speak for me, and in the end, that was all that mattered. They had talked over me for years, but now they couldn't even get a word in. And as they sat there, unable to explain their actions, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had fought for what was mine, quietly, carefully, and with purpose. And now I had won. I didn't yell. I let the subpoena arrive. And in the silence that followed, I knew I had already taken back what was mine. The calls started coming almost immediately after the ruling. At first, they were sporadic missed calls, unanswered messages. But then, they became more frequent, more insistent. Voicemails full of excuses, full of apologies that didn't feel sincere, full of pleas for me to pick up, to listen, to talk. "I didn't mean it, Mom," he said in one voicemail. "I was just trying to help. You know I didn't want things to get like this. It wasn't supposed to go this way." My daughter's voice trembled on the next message. "We were just doing what we thought was best for you." I let the voicemail sit in my inbox, waiting, untouched. Every word they spoke only confirmed what I already knew, that they didn't get it, that they never truly saw me, not the way I had always tried to see them. They didn't understand that it wasn't about apologies or explanations. It was about the years of betrayal, the decisions they had made for me without asking, the control they had tried to take over my life. They could apologize all they wanted, but the damage had already been done. The trust had been broken, and I wasn't going to be swept back into their games just because they had realized too late that they had crossed a line. Friends of mine, well-meaning, but misguided, began to pressure me. "You can't just leave it like this," they'd say. "It's your family. You have to make peace with them. It's not too late." But it was too late for that. Making peace would mean forgiving them without acknowledgement of what they had done, without them facing the consequences of their actions. I wasn't in the business of sweeping things under the rug anymore, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. It was one thing to love someone unconditionally, but it was another to let them take from you, to let them step over you again and again without standing up for yourself. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't respond to the texts. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. They wanted me to engage, to explain myself, to accept their apologies as if it would make everything go back to the way it was before. But I wasn't interested in going back. I wasn't interested in pretending that I could just erase everything that had happened. I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them anything. They confused silence with submission. They thought that because I wasn't fighting back, because I wasn't calling them out every time they tried to manipulate me, that I was giving in. But I wasn't giving in. I was making a choice. I was choosing not to respond, choosing not to engage, choosing not to let their guilt trip me into giving them another chance to take what wasn't theirs. I remember sitting in my living room, hearing the phone ring again and again, but not moving to pick it up. I could feel the tension building, the pull between what I knew I should do, answer the call, listen to their apologies, and what I knew I had to do for myself. Nothing. I was done with the guilt trips. I was done with the pressure. I had been giving for so long, and now it was time to take something back. Every time they called, I let it ring. Every message they left, I ignored. I didn't feel anger or resentment. I didn't feel relief either. I just felt calm. It was like a quiet decision had settled over me, and in that stillness, I realized that silence wasn't a weakness. It wasn't submission. It was strength. It was knowing that I didn't need to justify my choices to anyone. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to explain myself. As the days passed, the calls stopped. They became less frequent, less insistent. It was like they had finally realized that I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who bent to their will, who gave in to their manipulation. And that silence? That was the most powerful thing I could have done. I had been their caretaker for years. I had always been the one to listen, to fix things, to make peace. But I realized, as I let the silence stretch between us, that I didn't have to be that person anymore. I had done my part. I had given everything. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences of their actions. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to make peace with them. I had made peace with myself, and that was enough. They had taken everything they could from me, but what they didn't realize was that I was no longer the person they could control. And that was the most important thing of all. I sat in the quiet of my living room, the soft hum of the afternoon settling around me. My fingers gently traced the edges of old letters, faded memories tucked between the folds of yellowed paper. Letters from years ago, when I was younger, when I thought that everything I did was for them, that my sacrifices, my silence, my love would be enough. The words on those pages felt like a different life, a life I had almost forgotten, a life when I believed that if I gave enough, if I worked hard enough, I would be loved in return. But the letters were different now, no longer filled with the promises of the future, or the hopes for a family that would appreciate what I had given. Instead, they were a reminder of the weight of everything I had silently carried, the burdens I had taken on for their sake, never asking for anything in return. I used to think that I was doing it out of love. And maybe, in the beginning, I was. But somewhere along the way, I became a placeholder, a backdrop for their lives, never seen, never heard. Now, I could see it more clearly. I wasn't the burden after all. I wasn't the one who had to give and give until there was nothing left. I had spent so many years thinking that was my role, thinking that I was meant to carry their weight, their dreams, their burdens. But the truth was, they had been taking from me all along, and I had let them. I had allowed them to strip me of my voice, my autonomy, my right to make decisions. I had convinced myself that I was the one who was supposed to keep it all together, that I was the one who had to hold it all up. But not anymore. As I looked at the letters, I remembered who I was before I became the mom they thought they knew, before I became the person who lived for them and lost herself in the process. I remembered the woman I was before, strong, independent, someone who made her own decisions, who had her own voice. I hadn't lost her. She was still there, hidden beneath the weight of everything I had carried, waiting for me to find her again. This time, I paid the lawyer myself. I made the call. I held the pen. For the first time in a long time, I made decisions that were mine. No one else's. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself that I had almost forgotten. The feeling was quiet, but it was strong. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but in those moments, I knew I had taken back something I thought I had lost forever. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their permission. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, and no one could take that from me. I had spent years waiting for someone else to give me something, an apology, an acknowledgement, a thank you. I had waited for them to realize what they had done, for them to see the sacrifices I had made. But nothing came. No flowers, no heartfelt apologies, no grand gestures. I waited, and I waited, and still, nothing. So I bought my own flowers. No one had brought them for me. No one had remembered the years of sacrifice, the quiet pain, the love that had gone unnoticed. So I decided to stop waiting for someone else to do it. I went to the market and picked the brightest, most beautiful bouquet I could find. I bought them for myself, because I was worthy of them. I wasn't going to wait for anyone to recognize me anymore. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I knew it now. I placed the flowers on the kitchen table, their colors bright and bold against the simplicity of my home. They were a reminder that I could give to myself, that I didn't need anyone to do it for me. I had spent so many years waiting for someone else to see my worth, to acknowledge what I had done for them. But now, I realized that I was the one who needed to see it. I was the one who needed to acknowledge my own strength, my own worth, and to recognize that I had given enough, more than enough. I wasn't the burden. I never had been. I had been carrying them. But now, I was standing tall. I wasn't broken. I wasn't forgotten. And I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel like I was any less than what I was. I was a woman who had lived, who had loved, and who had given everything. But now, I was giving something back to myself. And that was the most important thing I could do. There are more of us than they know. I realized that one evening after church, when a few of the women gathered in the back of the sanctuary, chatting as we waited for the crowd to thin. At first, the conversations were quiet whispers, really. The kind of talk that you'd start with a nervous laugh, testing the waters to see who might understand. I didn't say much at first. I just listened, nodding along, hearing fragments of other women's stories. Stories about feeling invisible, being dismissed, being taken for granted. Stories about families who thought they knew better, about children who believed they had the right to make decisions for us. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But there was something about those stories, the way they mirrored my own, that made me feel less alone. In the eyes of the women around me, I saw the same struggle, the same quiet rage, the same fear of not being heard. They shared their shame, their quiet pain, and somehow, in the sharing, we started to find power. For the first time in so long, it wasn't just my story. It was ours. I began to see the same thing at bus stops, in grocery lines, at the coffee shop. Older women sitting together, talking softly, but with more conviction than I had ever heard. There was something that connected us, something invisible yet so powerful, a thread of shared experience that bound us together. We had all been through it. The quiet betrayal, the silence we were expected to accept, the years we spent doing everything for others while we were left unnoticed. But as we shared our stories, I realized we were no longer willing to sit in silence. We were speaking now. It wasn't just happening in private either. There were online forums, too. Groups of women who had been through similar struggles, sharing advice, resources, and encouragement. It was amazing how quickly these quiet pockets of strength grew. We were scattered across the world, but we found each other. We found each other in the most unexpected places like online forums, where women gathered late at night after their families had gone to bed, where we could finally be heard without being interrupted. There, we shared our wisdom, our warnings, and our healing. They whispered at first, quietly, uncertain, not sure if anyone would listen. But then, we started speaking louder, together, each one of us, a voice in a chorus that grew stronger with every story we shared. We weren't alone anymore. The power in that connection was undeniable. It wasn't just about the validation we gave one another. It was about realizing that our voices mattered to every single one of us. We had carried our burdens in silence for so long, thinking we were the only ones. But now, we knew the truth. We weren't alone. There were more of us than they knew. It didn't matter how old we were or where we came from. What mattered was that we had all been through the same thing, the struggle for recognition, for respect, for our voices to be heard. And now, we were speaking together, refusing to be quieted any longer. I began to see the strength in us, in the women who, despite everything, kept going. We had been quiet for too long, but now we were speaking up. We had each other's backs. We weren't just sharing stories anymore. We were making our own future. A future where we didn't have to wait for permission, where we didn't have to beg for validation, where we could live for ourselves. As the years passed, I saw more of us stepping out of the shadows, refusing to be invisible anymore. And it wasn't just the women in my church or at the bus stops, it was women everywhere. We were no longer afraid to speak our truth, to stand together, to rise as one. We had shared our shame, and now we shared our power, and that power was unstoppable. We were no longer silent. We were no longer the background noise in someone else's life. We were speaking, and we were speaking together. There are more of us than they know, and when we speak with the voices of all the women who came before us, and with all the strength of the women who will come after. We are unstoppable. The final paperwork was sealed. Every last detail carefully reviewed, every signature in place. I could feel the weight of it, the weight of all that had come before, all the years of giving, of sacrificing, of being seen as nothing more than an afterthought. But now, it was done. The will was final, and everything was redirected to where it truly belonged. For so long, I had been the one who gave, the one who kept things together, the one who quietly stood in the background while everyone else took what they needed. I had watched as they took more than they should have, and I had let them. I had let them dismiss me, let them make decisions for me, thinking it was what was best for me. I had let them believe they knew better. They had written me off as a dependent, as someone who couldn't manage their own life. They thought I was weak. They thought they could control everything, my money, my choices, my future. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't a dependent. And in the end, they learned that the hard way. The assets, the savings I had carefully built over the years, weren't going to them. Not anymore. I had redirected everything to those who had truly cared, those who had seen me for who I was, not what they could take from me. It wasn't about revenge, but about fairness. It wasn't about punishing them, but about ensuring that the people who had respected me, who had understood what I had done, were the ones who benefited from the life I had lived. They would receive what I had built, because they were the ones who valued me. They were the ones who treated me with respect. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. It was simply the way it had to be. I had given them everything I could, but I would not let them take what was mine any longer. They had crossed a line, and now it was time for them to understand the consequences. I didn't need to fight them. I didn't need to shout or argue. I had simply drawn a line, a quiet, firm line, and I wasn't letting them cross it anymore. As the lawyer handed me the final version of the will, I looked over the documents one last time. They were solid. There was no going back now. The decisions were made, and nothing they said or did would change it. My legacy was set in stone, and it wasn't going to the ones who thought I was just a source of support. It was going to those who truly cared, those who saw me as I was strong, capable, deserving. They thought I was a dependent. They thought they could control me, manage me, decide my fate. But I had the last word. I wrote them out of everything. I stood there for a moment, the reality of it settling over me. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the things. It was about the principle. It was about reclaiming my power, about showing them that I wasn't someone they could take advantage of. Not anymore. I had spent my life giving. But now, for the first time in so long, I was taking back what was mine. They had thought they could control me. But in the end, it wasn't them who would decide my fate. It was me. And as I looked at the final paperwork, I felt a quiet sense of victory. I had done what was right. I had made my choices. And I had taken my power back. They wouldn't learn my name in the will. But the people who mattered, the ones who had shown me true respect and love, would. This was my final act. And in this quiet victory, I had come full circle. I had built my life. And now, I was leaving it on my terms. The flowers arrived on my birthday. A quiet reminder that they hadn't forgotten me, least, not completely. A bouquet of white roses, so pristine, so innocent looking. They were beautiful, sure, but I didn't need beauty. I didn't need their apology wrapped in petals. The card that came with them was sappy, filled with words that felt too little, too late. "We're sorry, Mom," it said. "We never meant to hurt you. Please forgive us." It was unsigned, of course. They never learned to put their names on their apologies. Not in a way that mattered. Not in a way that could be held accountable. They had gotten used to me forgiving them without question. They thought a bouquet, a few words, could undo years of taking, years of betrayal. But I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the woman who had accepted their excuses, who had let them take without giving back. I let the flowers sit on the table for a while. They didn't smell like apologies. They didn't feel like love. They were just flowers. And when I looked at them, all I could feel was a hollow sense of obligation, a reminder of how many times they had given me flowers, cards, empty promises that meant nothing once the moment had passed. The roses didn't change anything. The card didn't change anything. They thought they could smooth things over with a gesture. But gestures were never going to fix what had been broken. The cards stayed unopened. I didn't need to read their empty words. I didn't need to hear their excuses disguised as sorrow. I had heard it all before. The promises that they would do better, that they would change, that they'd never hurt me again. It was all the same song they'd sung when they took from me without asking, when they stepped over me like I wasn't even there. And so, I did what I needed to do. I took the bouquet, took the card, and packed them up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't demand anything. I just boxed them up and prepared them to go back. I wasn't going to accept their flowers. I wasn't going to let them think that sending roses was enough to erase everything they had done to me. I sealed up the box carefully, taped it shut, and inside, I slipped a court order reminder of what they had done and what they would no longer get away with. They had sent white roses. I mailed back thorns. Bound with the court order, there was no need to say anything more. The flowers were gone, sent back with the one thing they couldn't ignore, the law, the finality of it, the reminder that I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their gestures. What I needed was respect, and that was something they would have to earn, something they would never earn with flowers or cards or empty words. They had written me off before. They had taken from me and left me behind, thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking I wouldn't fight back. But I had learned how to fight without saying a word. I had learned to show my strength in ways they couldn't see coming. When they opened that box, when they saw the thorns and the court order, they would know. They would understand. Their flowers had been rejected, not because I didn't care, but because they hadn't earned it. They had sent flowers, but I had sent them back with the one thing they couldn't ignore, the one thing they never expected, my strength, my voice, my decision. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt nothing but peace. I rented a little cottage tucked away at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a small, humble place with a patch of sun that warmed the front porch in the late afternoon, but it was mine, my own space, a place where I could finally breathe again without the weight of expectations pressing down on me. The house was simple, with crooked floors and a slightly leaky roof, but to me, it was perfect. It was the first time in years that I had a space all to myself, a space where no one could take anything from me, not even my name. The small yard out back was overgrown with weeds, but I saw potential in it, something to nurture, something to care for. I planted tomatoes, just a few, nothing fancy, but each little sprout that pushed through the soil felt like a victory. There was something deeply satisfying about watching those green shoots stretch toward the sky, knowing that I was the one who had made it happen. No one had done this for me. I had taken the time, the care, the energy to plant something new, and I was watching it grow, slowly but surely. There was a kind of quiet joy in the routine of it all. The days were simple long walks to the local market, visits to the library, afternoons spent with my hands in the dirt, tending to the garden I had made my own. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to answer questions or justify my actions. The neighbors were kind, but they didn't ask too much, and I didn't mind. It wasn't about isolation, it was about peace. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone, but now, here in this little cottage, I was learning to simply be. In the evenings, when the sun began to dip low in the sky, I'd sit on the porch, watching the light fade from the sky. The world seemed so still, so quiet. There were no demands, no expectations, just the hum of life going on around me. It wasn't a busy kind of peace, the kind that fills your days with appointments and places to be. It was a soft peace, the kind that settles into your bones when you stop running, when you stop trying to please everyone. It was the kind of peace I had been searching for, though I hadn't known it at the time. There was something about sitting there, in the fading light, that made me realize how far I had come, how much I had given, and how much I had finally taken back for myself. No one here questioned my name on the mailbox. No one tried to take control of my life or make decisions for me. My name was mine again, and it was a quiet victory. A victory that didn't need to be loud or celebrated. It was simply the truth. I spent the mornings with a cup of tea, watching the light stretch across the yard, feeling the warmth on my face. The tomatoes grew slowly, but they grew. Everything felt steady. Everything felt right. There were no obligations here. No one needed me to be anything other than who I was. I didn't have to be the caretaker anymore, the one who held everything together for everyone else. I could let go, if only for a little while. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling as I worked, as I watered the plants or trimmed the hedges. It wasn't a big smile. It wasn't some great declaration of triumph, but it was there, a small private smile that I hadn't allowed myself in years. It was the smile of someone who had finally found their way back to themselves. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I was simply living. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I didn't need grand gestures or grand plans. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices or approve of my life. I had built this little home, this little piece of peace for myself. And that was all that mattered. I planted tomatoes in the small patch of sun behind the house. And every time I saw the green vines climbing, I remembered something important. I had the power to grow, too. And no one could take that from me. Not anymore. I spent countless nights with a pen in my hand, journaling my journey, writing down everything I had gone through, everything I had learned. For years, I had kept my thoughts and feelings hidden, buried beneath the weight of my responsibilities. But now, I had the space to reflect, to finally give my voice a place to exist, without fear of being dismissed or ignored. I wrote about the quiet moments, the ones that felt small but were actually monumental. I wrote about the years I had spent quietly giving everything, giving my time, my energy, my life, to those who never seemed to notice. I wrote about the first time I realized I had been used, the moment when it all clicked, when I saw just how much had been taken from me, and how little I had in return. I wrote about the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the long, slow journey to find my own strength again. But I also wrote about the moments of clarity, the times when I knew I could take back my life, when I felt a surge of power, however small. I wrote about the quiet but sure steps I took toward reclaiming my voice, my choices, my life. With every word, I started to piece myself back together. I started to remember who I was before I became someone else's caretaker, before I became invisible. One of those nights, I decided to write a letter to my daughter. It wasn't a letter to ask for forgiveness, nor one to make peace. It was a letter to tell her the truth, to let her see me as I was, to show her the woman I had always been underneath the motherly role I had played for so long. It wasn't filled with anger or accusations. It was simply the truth about how I had felt, how I had been treated, how I had lost myself in the process of giving everything for others. But when I finished the letter, I couldn't bring myself to send it. I had spent so many years waiting for her to see me, to understand me, but I knew now that it was no longer about her understanding. It was about me. It was about finally standing up for myself, even if she couldn't hear me. So, I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it, but I didn't send it. I didn't need her response. I didn't need her to read it. The letter wasn't for Harriet, it was for me. It was my truth, my voice, my story. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to validate it. But I kept one copy. I kept it tucked in a drawer, where only I could see it, where I could pull it out when I needed to remind myself of my journey, of how far I had come. It was a letter of liberation, a reminder of the strength it took to write my truth, even if no one else ever read it. They took my voice. I wrote it louder, in ink, in law. The law wasn't just something I used to get what I wanted. It was something I had to use to protect myself. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was powerful. The decisions I made, the actions I took, the legal documents I filed, all of them were a way of saying, I am here. I matter. My voice matters. Each stroke of the pen was a reclaiming. Each document filed was a declaration. They had tried to silence me for so long, but now I had found my voice, my truth, in a way that could not be ignored. I had written it on paper. I had sealed it in ink, and I had made it law. The truth had been spoken, and now it was backed by something more permanent than just words. As I reflected on the pages in front of me, I knew that I had done something important. I had told the truth not to anyone else, but to myself. And in doing so, I had finally given myself the freedom I had been waiting for. The letter to my daughter stayed unopened, but it didn't matter. It wasn't about her hearing me. It was about me finally hearing myself. Writing it down, in my own hand, was the first step toward reclaiming everything I had lost, and that was enough. I left with no forwarding address. I didn't write a letter or make a grand declaration. I didn't call, and I didn't explain. I simply let go. I packed my things quietly, one box at a time, each item carefully folded or packed, without any fanfare, without a single word spoken to anyone who had once been part of my life. I didn't need to say goodbye. I didn't need to tell them why I was leaving or what had driven me to this point. There was no grand finale, no loud exit. I had spent years trying to make them understand, trying to explain my feelings, trying to get them to see me for who I was. But in the end, it became clear that they weren't listening. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about them, about their need to control, to dictate my choices, to make me into someone I wasn't. So, I stopped trying to make them understand. I stopped waiting for their approval or their validation. It wasn't about running away. It wasn't about hiding. It was simply about peace. I needed peace, and the only way I could find it was to leave behind the noise, the expectations, and the manipulation that had marked my life for so long. The silence that followed my departure wasn't a void. It was a space for me to breathe again, to heal, to find myself once more. They thought silence was surrender, but they didn't understand. It wasn't surrender. It was survival. The years I spent in their presence, the years I spent trying to be everything for everyone else, those were the years I had to let go of. because in holding on, I had been slowly losing myself. Silence wasn't defeat. It wasn't weakness. It was my way of taking back control, of choosing to stop fighting a battle that wasn't mine to fight anymore. I didn't need a funeral to bury a bond. A bond is buried in the quiet moments, in the decisions you make that no one sees coming. It's buried in the choices to let go, to stop trying to make something work that never would. It's buried when you stop living for others and start living for yourself. No grand gestures. No final words, just the simple act of walking away. And when I walked away, I left everything behind. I left the people who had once been my world, the people who had taken me for granted, the people who had never once stopped to ask what I needed, what I wanted. I left the hurt, the disappointment, and the years of silent sacrifice. And in that silence, I found the freedom I had been searching for. The goodbye wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It wasn't for them. It was for me. It was for my peace, my freedom, my sense of self that I had almost lost. I didn't need to explain, to apologize, to make them understand. I simply needed to leave. And in that quiet departure, I finally became whole again. They will speak my name when it's too late. No apology, no words of remorse will ever reach me now. They'll call out to me, try to soften the edges of their guilt, but it won't matter. They had their chance. They had years to see me, to hear me, to acknowledge what I had done for them. But they ignored me, dismissed me as a mere figure in the background, a name they could take for granted. Now, my name is etched in legal record, not in the way they thought it would be. Once an afterthought, now it stands firm, unmovable, a reminder of what they tried to take and what they lost. There is no turning back. The courts have spoken, and the truth has been set down in ink and law. They can never rewrite this story. I wasn't the loud one. I wasn't the one shouting for attention or pleading for recognition. I was the quiet room they thought was empty, a space they thought they could fill with their own voices, their own plans. But they were wrong, because now, that silence echoes, not in their favor, but in the cold finality of the truth. I was the quiet room they thought was empty, until it echoed in court.